In this activity, I want to go through the entire process of generating a model. In particular, I'm going to create a production planning model for a particular company called Soft Water. So before we begin this activity, let's go ahead and review some of the problem background. Okay, again, the company is called Soft Water. They actually produce pellets for water softeners, and in particular they sell many different kinds of products, but their two primary products include a 40-pound and an 80-pound bag of pellets. So the company has a wide variety of manufacturing capabilities, most of which are tied up with other projects. Management feels confident that they can make either the 40 or 80-pound bags without disrupting any other projects. So I should mention also that you can make a variety, a mixture of both some 40, some 80 pounds, not just one or the other. In terms of the processes required to produce the 40-pound bag and the 80-pound bag, they require the same process. So we have packaging. We have a space requirement, so much square footage could be dedicated to the packaging of the material and the storage of material. We have the packing material constraint, so we only have so much material that we can actually pack the bags with. We have a raw material constraint, albeit salt, and we actually have a production time constraint. So there's 4 things that we need to track in this spreadsheet to make sure we're not violating anything. So if we come up with a proposed plan of how many 40-pound bags and how many 80-pound bags to manufacture, we have to make sure that they're actually under the resources that we have in terms of packaging space, the materials, the raw materials, and then the production time. So based on an estimate by management, we have about 1,500 square foot available for their packaging facility. We have about 6,000 square feet for packaging materials. We have 10,000 pounds of raw material on inventory on hand right now, and then we expect a shipment of 25,000 pounds to arrive anytime. So in terms of the requirements of these 4 processes that we'd like to model, for the 40-pound bag, it requires 1.9 square feet of packaging space in our facility. So once we pack it, we're going to store it. It also requires 6 square feet of packaging materials. 40 pounds of raw materials. Obviously, when we're creating the 40-pound bag, we're going to use 40 pounds of the raw materials. And 4.5 minutes of production time. For the 80-pound variety, we have 3.1 square feet is required for the space, 14 square feet for the materials, 80 pounds of raw material, and 9.4 minutes of production for every bag produced. Okay, so the task in this particular exercise is to create a model for a proposed plan of producing 250 bags of the 40-pound variety and 300 of the 80-pound variety. The model should track the resources used and calculate the total profit based on the plan. By knowing that each 40-pound bag has a profit margin of $2.50 and $5.75 for each 80-pound bag. Okay, just to give you an overview of the model, we should create a section for inputs. So this section would include somewhere in our spreadsheet a listing where we can change perhaps the number of 40-pound bags that we're going to manufacture, as well as the 80-pound bags. We should have a space for additional inputs, for example, the raw material on inventory, raw material on order, and for that matter, the total raw material that we're trying to plan for. So those should be individual cells in your spreadsheet so we could actually develop this sheet and use it later. In terms of the resources used, we really want to make sure that this is going to be not violating, let's say, a constraint in this problem is that we can't use any more than we have available. We can only use less than or equal to the amount of resources that we have at hand. So if we only have, let's say, 1,500 square foot of storage space and packing space, then we can't actually propose a plan that would violate that. In terms of the material, it's the same thing. If we have 6,000 square foot of material, packaging material, I should add, that we shouldn't violate that constraint either. So we want to create essentially a column of used resources and a column of the available, just to identify situations where we might be in violation. Finally, we'll have a section for the profit, and we just listed out those profit margins, so we can calculate the profit based on the number of units that we are proposing. So let's go ahead and open up the starting file. You might notice that actually this file is a blank worksheet. I really want you to digest the information in this slideshow and try this activity on your own before watching the solution to this problem. So basically document everything you know in terms of the inputs, create headers for the things that you need to calculate, for example the used resources and the resources available, total profits, and use those best practices that we've talked about in terms of arranging your spreadsheet items. If they are logically related, they should be physically related. So at this time, I would recommend that you pause the video, work on this for a while, and then at a later point, view my solution. This actually is just one proposed solution. In generating a model, it could look very differently. So I'll show you what I have created. Okay, starting from a blank workbook, I would recommend changing the name of the tab to something more descriptive, let's say soft water. I would then go through the process of documenting everything I know about this problem and then trying to arrange the spreadsheet in a way that relates the logically related to physically related. For example, we do have inputs. The two inputs that we would like to keep track of include our products that we're trying to plan for, which include the 40-pound bag and the 80-pound bag. So in terms of the number of bags, we might document that here, and we're going to leave these two spaces available for any number that we'd like to type in. And the production plan is calling for 250 units of the 40-pound and 300 80-pound bags. So as I go through here, I'm not going to refer back to the original PowerPoint and the problem, so you might want to go through and document and understand where these numbers are coming from. And as I document this, I'm going to do a little formatting so we get a consistent look and feel in terms of our spreadsheet. For example, any heading that I have, and I propose 4 sections in our Excel spreadsheet: inputs, additional inputs, resources, and output. I'm going to create a merge and center header with a black fill and white bold text. Now this is just my convention, obviously. Like I said earlier, these spreadsheets certainly can differ in their look and feel, but ultimately you should be able to calculate the same values that I calculate in terms of those resources used and the profits that we're after. Okay, I might also give the remaining headings, the labels, a fill of light gray. Now typically what I do, and this is just my experience, is that anytime I have a changing cell, something a user might put on, I either fill it with a red font, or what I'll do is just fill the entire cell with red. It's something that brings this cell to my attention, and I think red does a good job of that. Of course, this is my preference. I'm going to go down to the next section of additional inputs and list out everything I know. I know that I have raw material in inventory. The units would be pounds, and I'll just document that as LBS. I have raw material on order that we're trying to incorporate in addition to our inventory levels, but we're trying to incorporate the new shipment in our production plan. So we have so many pounds there. And we have a total, so a combination of, or a summation of the raw materials on inventory and on order. So the idea is that we're breaking down these categories into many steps because a user later might want to change values. So change the values in the bags produced or the inventory levels and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead, since I have a lot of text here, what I'm actually going to do is put the values here. And I did have 10,000 pounds of raw material in inventory. 25,000 pounds are coming in on shipment, which would give me a sum of 35,000. So let's do a little formatting here. Let's merge and center, and perhaps use the black fill white text, the borders that we're going to use, the light gray, and perhaps you'd want to merge these cells. So I'm going to merge one, use the format painter to merge the remaining two, and I actually selected on the wrong cell, so I'm going to hit undo. So format painter, and then start from A7 in my case down, and it's going to format both of those in the similar fashion where all three cells are merged together. Okay, so I'm going to also format this as a comma style with no decimal places. And you might want all your numbers to align. You can certainly play around the format there. Perhaps this looks a little bit more appealing. And I could do the same thing with a merge and center, and it looks like I've got slightly a different gray here, so let's go ahead and update these. So as you can see already in my spreadsheet design, I'm doing a lot of moving around, and that's actually pretty common because it's sort of an evolving process when you start creating a spreadsheet. Once you incorporate more data into your spreadsheet, the spreadsheet tends to morph into something of a final state. So I'm just trying to use good principles, keeping everything aligned as best as I can, and so forth, just to get a spreadsheet that I think looks rather well. Since these are inputs too, I'm going to go ahead and fill this with our red, and now start to work on our resources. Okay, in terms of our resources, we have many constraints, if you will. So I'm just going to give my column a header here of constraints. It's really the processes, so maybe that is a better word. So processes. I have a packing space requirement and square foot. I have a packing materials requirement in terms of square foot. Raw materials in terms of pounds. Production time in terms of minutes. And what I'd really like to do, I'm just kind of looking ahead after I document all these processes, I'd really like to keep my 40 and 80 pound bag information in the same column C and D. I think that is really good form because everything is lined up properly. So what I'm going to do is continue with my headers. I'm just going to reference this text up here and fill it to the right, which means I have two columns here. We can just apply the same merge and center that we've been doing. Once we do one or a few, we can actually copy the format of one and go ahead and change the rest. I'm going to change this back to a centered. That looks okay to me. Let's go ahead and apply that gray fill that we've been using for inputs. with a border. The black and white for the main column, the main header, which so far will stretch out something like this. But we have more information to add. Let's go ahead and list some of the things that we want to calculate. We do have used resources that we'll need to calculate, and then we have available. And again, the idea is that we can quickly check to see if we're violating these resources. So we'll have a used based on the recommended production plan, and then we have something available in terms of our resources that we can check against. Okay, so I'm going to copy this format, go ahead and apply it, go ahead and merge these cells here. Everything's starting to look good. Let's go ahead and fill this with the all borders. And again, I know I'm a little detailed in formatting this, but I do want to make it look good. So let's go ahead and do that while we're developing this. Now, from the problem description, we have so many resources required per bag. So in this case of packaging space required for each bag is 1.9 square foot, 6 square foot of materials. For each bag of 40 pound that we create, it's going to take 40 pounds of our raw materials away. In terms of our production time, it's going to take 4.5 minutes for each 40 pound bag. For 80 pounds, we have 3.1. For packaging space, we have 14 square foot for the materials, 80 pounds per bag of raw materials, and 9.4 minutes per 80 pound bag. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I notice this is slightly a different gray, so I want to be consistent. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and model what we have used based on this production plan. And what I tend to do is any calculation that I might have, I might actually use a darker gray to indicate that these are calculations. These are not going to change. The constants, for example, are no fill to the left. And this is just a strategy I use when developing spreadsheets. So let's go ahead and calculate the resources used. Since I've developed this in a way, I can use a sum product easily to calculate the resources used. But before I do, let me show you the longer method. So if I wanted to calculate total packaging space required based on this production plan, it would be 250 times 1.9 plus the 300 bags of the 80 pound times the 3.1 per bag. Now I could lock the rows, in this case of the number of bags, and simply fill this down, which is a fine strategy. I prefer, on the other hand, to use sum product, which will give you exactly the same number. Sum product of the units, $, comma. The next array would be the constants related to per bag. Let's go ahead and fill that down and fill the formula down. We can use a comma style without decimal places if you like. And now we can just simply document what we were given in the problem in terms of our resources available. We had 1,500, 6,000, 30. Well, this 3,500 is actually a reference to the total raw materials. And let's say 4,000 resources available. Now, anytime I'm dealing with a constraint, I like to highlight that as yellow. I think that makes sense. To me, it's saying caution. Don't go over these numbers. But again, this is just my model. Yours may differ, which is totally fine. Okay, so the idea is that used should be less than the resources. So in this plan, we're at 1405 for the square footage. We have 15 available, so the plan works. We have 5,700 square foot available in used in material packaging. We have 6,000 available, so we're okay. We're under the raw materials constraint, and we're under the total production time that we have estimated that we have. So far so good. Now the final thing we need to calculate is a total profit. So the last thing we have is just the outputs, and we need to calculate total profit. In terms of our products, it's just like before. Let me put an S on the end of that. We have a situation where we have the 40 pound and 80 pound. Since I'd like to keep this all in one column, I'm going to actually do this in the cell in this column. So let's reference the 40 pound. Let's merge and center these cells. We do have a profit margin of, let's say, $2.50 for every 40 pound bag manufactured and sold, and 5.75 for every 80 pound bag manufactured and sold. Let's go ahead and add an accounting format. Let's fix our merge and center here. Our outputs will stretch all the way over to here because we're going to add a profit header here. And we simply just need to calculate the profit based on the production plan. So we can actually copy this formula above and paste it here. Now to me, I always use a green fill for profit. So let's go ahead and fix our formats everywhere else. We can use our borders and other fills and things like that. So now, after I apply an accounting format here, it does look like we have an entire model generated for this soft water company. So if I was to change any of my user input cells, I could do so. I would note that we have 2,350 based on the production plan that was given to us. It could be you're using a type of spreadsheet like this to come up with a plan. If, for example, I was to change this to 300, I could actually notice where I am violating my resources. I'm violating the raw materials. I got 1,000 extra that I would need to implement this plan. And as far as production time, I need an extra 170 minutes that I don't necessarily have currently. I could go back and check my estimates that my available resources did in fact mimic this, but ultimately the idea is that we can change these inputs and model directly down to the profit and the resources that we wanted. So before we close, let's go ahead and change this 300 that I just recently changed back to 250 units.